They thought betrayal was the end of your story. What they never realized is that it was only the beginning. Every toxic person makes the same mistake. They confuse your silence with defeat. But silence is never weakness, it's the sound of transformation. They laughed when you fell, but karma doesn't laugh. Karma waits. And when it arrives, it doesn't knock, it strikes. They laughed when they betrayed you. They cheered when you stumbled. They convinced themselves that your fall was final, that you would remain shattered, forgotten, and small. But here's the truth they never understood. Karma doesn't rush. It doesn't wear a watch. It waits in the shadows, patient and precise, striking when the world has already moved on. And now, the very people who once stood against you are watching everything they built crumble slowly, painfully, like sand slipping through their fingers. The same hands that once pushed you down are now trembling, reaching out, begging for mercy. They never offered you, but this time, the tables have turned. In this video, you're going to see exactly how karma works, why it's striking them harder than they ever imagined, and how you can stand in your power without lifting a single finger in revenge. There's a moment every betrayed person knows, that chilling silence after the storm. It's when those who hurt you smirk, certain that the damage is permanent. They believe they've written the last chapter of your story. In their mind, your pain is their victory. They see you stepping back, broken, gathering fragments of what's left, and they take your silence as proof of their triumph. But that's where they make their greatest mistake. Toxic people confuse quiet with weakness, and withdrawal with surrender. What they never see coming is the truth. You are not broken, you are rebuilding. You are not hiding, you are recalibrating. Yes, when they left, when they lied, when they stole what wasn't theirs, you felt the sting of betrayal. You felt the cold loneliness of being abandoned. You carried the heavy weight of their gossip, their mockery, their cruel indifference. And for a time, it seemed like they had won. That's exactly what they wanted you to believe. Toxic people thrive on the illusion that they hold the power to define your future. But beneath the surface, while they were celebrating your so-called end, something else was happening. You weren't shrinking, you were shedding. You weren't surrendering, you were strategizing. Pulling away was not weakness, it was wisdom. Because the first step to true healing is separation from the source of poison. They don't understand what silence really means. To them, silence is surrender. But to you, it was strategy. By stepping back, you gained clarity. You began to see through the lies. You started setting boundaries that no rumor, no betrayal could ever cross again. That quiet space they mistook for your grave. It was never a grave. It was a garden. And gardens take time to grow. You weren't posting about your pain. You weren't explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You weren't broadcasting your healing journey for the world to judge. Instead, you were doing the most dangerous thing anyone wounded but wise can do, were transforming in silence. And while you were growing, they stayed the same. In the silence you chose, something powerful was already unfolding. While you stepped back to heal and rebuild, they remained trapped in the same toxic patterns, repeating the same manipulative games, chasing the same hollow victories, clinging to the same fragile confidence that only comes from tearing someone else down. They never noticed that while they stood still, you were gathering momentum. Toxic people only think in terms of short-term wins. They want the thrill of a momentary triumph, the satisfaction of seeing someone else stumble. But Stoic people, those who value inner peace, self-worth, and the discipline of a strong mind think in terms of long-term victories. And that's exactly where karma begins to load its weapon. Not with an explosion, not with sudden fireworks, but with the slow, steady accumulation of consequences. The very energy they use to harm you begins to turn inward. Slowly, quietly, it eats away at the foundation they believed was unshakable. They still think you're frozen in time, stuck replaying the cruelty they inflicted. They imagine you're trapped in the past, defined by their betrayal, but they can't see the new boundaries you've built. They don't notice the discipline you've developed. They remain blind to the strength you've been forging in solitude, and that's the beauty of it. Their underestimation is your shield. They let down their guard at the exact moment they should be watching their backs. Because the calm before the storm is not just poetic, it's real. And right now, you are that storm. They cannot predict what they cannot prepare for. Karma doesn't need your hands for revenge. It only needs you to keep rising, to keep choosing the higher road, to keep standing when they expect you to fall. They thought they had buried you. They didn't know. You were a seed. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forces in this world. To toxic people, it looks like absence. It looks like surrender. But in truth, silence, when paired with emotional intelligence, is one of the most powerful strategies you will ever have. Think about it. When was the last time someone tried to provoke you? Maybe it was a colleague who spread rumors in the workplace, hoping to destroy your credibility. Maybe it was a family member who dragged your past mistakes into the light, using them as weapons to humiliate you in front of others. The natural instinct in moments like that is to defend yourself, to fight back, to prove them wrong. But that's exactly what they want. A reaction, because your reaction feeds their control. Your silence, however, starves it. When you choose not to engage, you're not ignoring them. You're reclaiming your power. You're drawing a boundary without even saying a word. Your silence tells them, you no longer have the power to drag me into your chaos. I once spoke to a woman who had been publicly humiliated by a close friend. Her trust was betrayed, her name dragged through gossip for months. Her first instinct was to defend herself, to post her side of the story, to expose the lies. But instead, she chose silence. She poured her energy into her career, built new friendships, and invested in her creative passions. A year later, the same friend stood alone, her manipulations unraveled by her own hands. No public confrontation was needed. That is spiritual justice at work, because silence is not passive, is active protection. It is the deliberate choice to guard your peace instead of gambling it away in a battle you could never win on their terms. The moment you stop reacting, the battleground shifts. They can no longer control the narrative because you've stepped outside of it completely. This is where self-worth becomes your anchor. When you value yourself deeply, you stop needing to prove anything to anyone. You stop chasing closure from people who never intended to give it. You begin to see that your time, your clarity, your peace are far too valuable to waste on the temporary thrill of winning an argument. And just as silence became your shield in the last chapter, here's what's even more powerful: your silence is never truly invisible. Even if you never post about them, even if you never speak their name again, toxic people can feel it when they no longer have access to your emotions. It unsettles them. It forces them to face the emptiness, the void where your attention used to be. Imagine a manipulator who spent years controlling every conversation, pushing every button, always confident that you would respond, maybe with tears, maybe with anger, maybe with desperate attempts to explain yourself. But now, they press the same buttons and nothing happens. No tears, no outrage, no explanations. Just calm, grounded silence. And that silence terrifies them, because it's not the ending they prepared for. That is what a high-performance mindset looks like in real life. Refusing to waste your energy on battles that don't matter, protecting your power for the things that do. And here's the beauty of it. Your silence doesn't just shield you in the moment. It creates the space for you to grow. With the noise gone, you can finally hear your own thoughts again. You can focus on rebuilding the life they once tried to shatter. You begin planting seeds of growth in your career, in your relationships, in your health, in your spiritual life, full while they remain trapped in drama, tangled in the very web they created. You're leveling up while they're obsessing over the past. You're preparing for the future while they're stuck replaying old games. And eventually, without you lifting a single finger, life begins to expose the truth. Their lies collapse under their own weight. Their manipulations backfire. And the same people who once believed them start to notice the cracks. That's when karma finally knocks on their door and by then, you are already miles away, untouched, safe, and strong, watching the storm from a distance, because silence isn't weakness, it's a power move. And the longer you hold it, the more it transforms from a shield into a sword. There's always a strange quiet before karma reveals itself. And this time, it's not your quiet, it's theirs. At first, you hear almost nothing about the people who wronged you. They fade from your radar. But if you pay close attention, small cracks begin to form in their world. It might appear subtle in the beginning, a sudden job loss, a friendship that ends without warning, a relationship that falls apart in the exact same way they once destroyed. Yours. They'll never admit it, but you'll see the pattern. The very patterns they once used to hurt you begin to turn inward, gnawing at their stability. I knew one man who went through a brutal business betrayal. His former partner drained their shared account, lied to clients, and spread rumors to destroy his reputation. At first, it looked like the partner had won. But less than a year later, whispers began to circulate. Clients were leaving, not because anyone exposed him, but because his own greed poisoned every new deal. That's the thing, armor doesn't need an audience. It works quietly behind the curtain until the truth can no longer be denied. And when it arrives, the first sign is always isolation. Toxic people thrive in networks of manipulation, but when their behavior becomes too predictable, even their allies start pulling away. People who once believed their stories begin noticing the inconsistencies. They start hearing the same complaints from others. The mask slips on suddenly. The one who always controlled the room is left standing alone. In it, the second sign, loss of control. These are people who once dictated the terms. They decided when to engage, when to ignore, when to charm, when to wound. But when karma comes, life flips the script. The power is no longer in their hands. The rules are no longer theirs too, right? And just as control slipped from their hands in the last chapter, the next stage becomes even clearer. Their carefully laid plans begin to fall apart. Their manipulations stop working. The harder they try to claw back control, the more desperate and chaotic they appear. And here's the detail most people often miss. Karma doesn't always strike with some dramatic, Hollywood-style punishment. More often, it works quietly, eroding from within. It shows up in the sleepless nights when guilt whispers into their conscience, It lingers in the constant anxiety of wondering when the truth will finally catch up. It lives in the inability to find any real peace because deep down, the soul knows exactly what it has done. I've seen this unfold within families. I remember a relative who once manipulated the will of an elderly parent, taking what never belonged to them, cutting out siblings, and leaving deep wounds behind. For years, they flaunted their so-called victory, smiling as if they had won. But over time, the cracks began to widen. Relationships inside their own home grew tense. Their children stopped trusting them. Their health declined under the weight of stress. And the very money they fought so hard for slipped away through endless expenses and reckless decisions. That is what spiritual justice looks like. The energy you put out into the world always finds its way back. And this is where your role becomes crucial. You do nothing. You don't gloat. You don't interfere. Because this was never about revenge. It's about respecting the universal law that every action carries a consequence. And yes, karma often takes longer than we wish. Why? Because it's not only about punishment, it's about lessons. They must come face to face with themselves. And that kind of reckoning cannot happen overnight. But when it does, when the moment finally arrives, karma strikes with precision so sharp that there can be no doubt. The third sign of karma is desperation. You may begin to notice in direct messages a mutual friend mentioning that they've been asking about you, an old acquaintance saying they want to make things right, or perhaps even a direct message from them cloaked in false humility. This is the moment they realize the truth. Whatever power they once held over you is gone. They're not reaching out of love or genuine remorse. They're reaching out because life has cornered them. And here is the real test for you. Do you let them back in? Or do you protect the psychological boundaries you've worked so hard to build? The Stoic answer is always clear. Protect your peace above all else. Forgiveness can live inside you. You release the anger so it doesn't poison your spirit. But forgiveness does not mean reconnection. You can wish them well from afar, while keeping the doors to your life firmly locked. I knew a woman who lived this truth. Years after her sister betrayed her in a financial scheme, the sister returned, broken, claiming she had changed. But the reality was harsher. She was broke, alone, and desperate for support. This woman forgave her sister in her heart, but still said no. That wasn't bitterness. That was wisdom. That was self-worth in action. And here's what matters most. By the time karma knocks on their door, you're no longer invested in their downfall. You've moved so far ahead, built so much joy, cultivated so much inner strength, that their world no longer touches yours. That is the real victory. Not that they suffer, but that you no longer need them to suffer in order for you to feel free. It always unfolds the same way. First comes the silence, then comes the collapse, and finally, the knock on the door sometimes. Literal, sometimes just a text or a message through a mutual friend. The very people who once spoke your name with arrogance now whisper it with hesitation. The ones who dismissed your worth now bring up the good times, trying to revive a connection they themselves destroyed. And, just as we saw in the last chapter, when karma stripped away their masks and left them desperate, the next step is inevitable. They circle back, testing the waters, hoping you've forgotten the pain they once caused. But here's the truth. They're not returning because they've suddenly become better people. They're coming back because karma has dismantled their illusions of control. And deep down, they remember the stability, the grounding, the peace you once brought into their lives. A close friend of mine experienced this with an ex who had treated her like she was disposable for years. He lied, manipulated, and slowly chipped away at her confidence. When she finally walked away, he smirked, convinced she would come crawling back. But she never did. Instead, she rebuilt her life from the ground up. She grew her emotional intelligence, set firm psychological boundaries, and flourished in ways he never imagined. 2 years later, a message popped up from him. "Hey, I'd been doing a lot of thinking." But he wasn't thinking about her healing. He wasn't thinking about the pain he caused. He was thinking about his loneliness, his financial troubles, and the harsh realization that no one else would tolerate his behavior. That isn't love. That's desperation, cleverly disguised as regret. And this is why your growth matters so much. Because when they return, you'll only be in one of two positions. Either still emotionally vulnerable, ready to let them back in, or grounded, whole, and wise enough to recognize the pattern. If you've been walking the Stoic path, choosing discipline over chaos, self-respect over validation, you'll be in the second position. They may come with rehearsed lines. "I've changed. I didn't realize how much you meant to me. Wish I could undo the past." But notice carefully, their words often lack specifics. True remorse is never vague. It names the harm done, accepts full responsibility without excuses, and acknowledges that forgiveness may never lead to reconciliation. Anything less is just manipulation dressed in softer clothing. I've seen toxic people cry real tears when they finally grasp that their access to someone's energy is gone for good. But those tears, they are not for you. They are for themselves, for the consequences they now face. That is spiritual justice. The moment when the mirror they've avoided for so long finally forces them to see who they've become. And this is the crossroads where your self-worth must rise to the surface as your shield. Yes, you can forgive, but forgiveness does not mean restoration. You can release the anger without reopening the door. You can wish them well while protecting your own peace. One of the hardest truths to accept is this: the apology you've been waiting for will never feel as good as you think. Why? Because by the time it arrives, you will have already outgrown the version of yourself who needed it. Stoicism has a saying, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." And by the time they come seeking mercy, you're no longer even interested in revenge, because you've already built a life in which they no longer matter. Picture this moment. They stand before you, rehearsed lines ready, hoping for a flicker of the old connection. But instead of the person they once knew open, desperate to be understood, they find someone calm, steady, untouchable. Someone who no longer needs closure from them because you've already given it to yourself. And here's the ultimate twist. The mercy they're begging for is not yours to give. The true judge is the life they must now live, a life built on the choices they made. You are not there to punish them, but you are also not there to save them. You've walked away not with bitterness, but with clarity. And that clarity is what keeps you free. And just as clarity became your freedom in the last chapter, here's the next revelation. Karma is rarely loud. When most people imagine karma, they picture a dramatic downfall, public humiliation, financial collapse, or betrayal repaid in kind. But the truth is, karma's most powerful form is often quiet, subtle, and deeply personal. And the irony, it doesn't require your involvement at all. Your silence is not just the absence of words, it is the presence of power. It's living. Proof that you no longer operate in their world, No longer play their games. No longer give them the reaction they crave. Every toxic person survives on reaction, whether it's your anger, your tears, or your desperate explanations. The moment you stop feeding their hunger, you starve them of control. And then comes the second blade of this double-edged sword. Success, true success, isn't about proving them wrong. It's about honoring your own potential, becoming the fullest version of yourself. And when you rise in this way, it sends shockwaves through the very people who once thought they had broken you. They expected to see you crawling. Instead, they see you walking taller, speaking clearer, smiling brighter. They see doors opening for you, doors they can't touch, no matter how hard they try. I know a man who lived through this. After a business deal went sour, his so-called friends publicly humiliated him. They spread lies, mocked him in front of mutual acquaintances, and even celebrated his financial struggles. They thought he would lash out, fight back, or defend himself, but he didn't. No angry posts, no public defense. Instead, he poured all of his energy into building something new. 2 years later, his company was thriving. His professional network had doubled. He had clients from around the world, and those same friends now sent him messages, pretending they were supportive all along. That's karma, not because they're begging for forgiveness, but because they're forced to watch him live the very life they once swore he would never have. Your success is far more than material gains. It's emotional stability. It's inner peace. It's the quiet confidence that no matter what life throws at you, you will not lose yourself. And when toxic people see you glowing without them, they're confronted with a truth they've been running from all along. They never had power over you. The only power they ever had was over the version of you who hadn't yet discovered your worth. Think about that. The very people who tried to destroy you must now live with the reality that not only did they fail, but their betrayal became your teacher. Their rejection became your redirection. Silence, combined with success, creates a psychological effect they cannot escape. They replay the times they underestimated you. They wonder who is supporting you now. They imagine the conversations you're having in rooms they will never enter. And it eats at them. Not because you're trying to hurt them, but because your very existence without them is the one outcome they never prepared for. This is why the Stoics believed so strongly in self-mastery over revenge. Revenge keeps you tied to the past. Self-mastery pulls you into the future. And in that future, your life itself becomes living proof that justice works, even without you lifting a single hand. One of my favorite sayings captures it perfectly. Sometimes, God removes people from your life for your protection. Other times, He removes you from theirs for their punishment. That is exactly what happens when you rise above. You're no longer in their world to fix them, rescue them, or validate them. And that absence becomes the loudest lesson of all. Here's the final truth. Your silence tells them they can't reach you, and your success tells them they can't stop you. And just as silence and success became the unshakable proof of your strength in the last chapter, together they now form the most unstoppable, undeniable form of karma there is. Most people assume that if they don't fight back, the other person somehow gets away with what they did. But here's the truth, one that both Stoicism and psychology agree on. The very moment you refuse to engage, you strip toxic people of the one thing they depend on most, your participation in their chaos. Revenge is like quicksand. The harder you struggle, the deeper you sink. And that's exactly how toxic people trap you. The moment you react, argue, or try to prove that you're not weak, you've already stepped back into the arena that they control. And in that arena, every move you make will be twisted. Your anger will be painted as aggression, your defense as guilt. They'll cast themselves as the victim, and you as the attacker. But when you walk away, you don't just leave the arena, you burn it down in their mind. Without you there to spar with, they lose their audience, their thrill, and their narrative. And suddenly, they have no one to blame but themselves. That's when karma begins to move faster than you might expect. I remember one client who discovered her co-worker had been sabotaging her projects. Instead of confronting her in a heated, emotional exchange, she quietly documented everything, stayed composed, and focused on networking with other leaders in the company. Within months, she was promoted, and the saboteur she was exposed, then demoted after trying the same manipulative tricks on someone else. That's the beauty of not retaliating. You let people's own behavior become the evidence against them. Here's why this works so powerfully. First, it preserves your emotional intelligence. By refusing to engage in petty revenge, you keep your focus and energy for what truly moves you forward. Second, it accelerates consequences. Without your reaction as a distraction, toxic people are left alone with their choices. Those choices catch up with them quickly. Third, it flips the power dynamic. They go from thinking they control the game to realizing they can't even provoke you. And for someone who feeds on drama, that loss of control is devastating. There's also a spiritual side to this. Across many belief systems, from Christianity to Eastern philosophies, the same lesson appears. You can't receive true justice if you insist on playing judge yourself. When you step back, you create space for life, for God, for the natural order, whatever you believe in, to do its work without interference. Think of it like a courtroom. If you keep interrupting the judge to plead your case, the process drags on. But when you step back and let the judge do their job, the verdict comes in its proper time and often with far more force than you ever imagined. And let's be honest, nothing disarms a toxic person faster than indifference. When they throw a verbal punch and you don't swing back, their momentum collapses. When they scheme to see you fall, yet you simply keep climbing higher, they are forced to watch from the sidelines. The Stoics had a saying for this: don't wrestle with pigs. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it. By refusing to wrestle, you not only stay clean, you leave them to wrestle alone. And without an opponent, their game falls apart. Here lies the paradox. When you actively try to punish someone, they can twist the story and frame themselves as the victim. But when you remove yourself completely, they're forced to face the reality that their downfall was self-inflicted. That's when karma doesn't just knock on their door, it kicks it down. And when karma moves, it doesn't send a warning. It doesn't text you to let you know. It arrives quietly, and then suddenly, the signs are everywhere, impossible to ignore. And here's the beautiful part: you don't even have to go searching for them. They have a way of finding you. It begins with subtle things, a sudden shift in their energy, and just as we saw before, karma doesn't send a warning. It simply arrives. The first signs of its presence often reveal themselves in subtle but undeniable ways. One of the earliest signs that karma has begun its work is a change in their demeanor. The same person who once walked with arrogance now moves with hesitation. Their steps are slower, their tone more careful. They avoid eye contact. Their voice softens. But don't mistake this for respect, it isn't. It's fear, disguised as politeness. They can sense the tide has turned, and it's no longer in their favor. I recall a woman who told me about an ex-boss who had sabotaged her promotion. Years earlier, by chance, she ran into him at a professional event. This was the same man who once belittled her in front of colleagues. But that day, when he greeted her, his voice cracked. The forced smile on his face couldn't hold. Why? Because her new title now outranked his, and he knew it. The second sign is the collapse of their alliances. Toxic people rarely operate alone. They gather allies, enablers, and an audience. But karma has a way of dismantling those circles piece by piece. Suddenly, the people who once laughed at their side start disappearing. The cheers turn into silence. The gossip becomes distance. And those who once joined in harming you now begin to protect their own image, leaving the instigator exposed and isolated. The third sign, their own tactics backfire. And this may be one of the most satisfying parts to witness even from afar. The very lies they spread about you begin to spread about them. The manipulations they once used against you are now used against them. The games they played to make you question yourself start eating away at their own stability. This isn't coincidence. It's the natural consequence of living inside deception. I once knew a man whose business idea was stolen by a former friend who tried to ruin his reputation. That so-called friend later partnered with someone even more ruthless, who turned against him in the exact same way. What you send out always comes back, and often it returns with interest. The fourth sign is that they seek contact, but the tone, this time, is different. When karma begins to strike, don't be surprised if you receive a message or a call. It usually won't start with a direct apology, at least not right away. Instead, it may sound casual, just wanted to check in, or how have you been? But beneath those words lies a hidden motive. They want to test if the bridge is still there. And if you've mastered emotional boundaries, you'll know exactly how to keep that bridge burned without losing your peace. The fifth sign, their image begins to crumble. Every toxic person carries a carefully crafted mask, an identity they show to the world. But karma cracks that mask wide open. Maybe it's a public mistake, maybe a rumor that turns out to be true, maybe a personal failure they can no longer hide. And you don't have to gloat. You just watch as the same people who once praised them now start questioning what they used to believe. The sixth sign, they begin to show internal struggle. This is the part few people talk about, but it's the most profound. Even if they never admit it out loud, you can see it. It shows in their body language, in their late-night social media posts, in their sudden disappearances. The posts about fake friends, the sudden obsession with loyalty. These are crumbs of guilt, insecurity, and paranoia, the byproducts of choices they can't undo. And the seventh sign, they try to rewrite history. When karma has done enough damage, some toxic people will try to soften the story. They may say, "We both made mistakes," or "It wasn't really that bad." But don't be deceived. This is not reconciliation. This is self-preservation, an attempt to blur the truth so they don't have to face the full weight of it. Karma strips away the masks and leaves them exposed. One of their most common reactions is to try to dilute their guilt, to water down the full weight of accountability. But here's the truth. Reality doesn't bend just because they feel uncomfortable. The facts remain. Here's the core lesson. When karma begins to move, you don't need to rush it, interfere, or even keep watch. You'll know it's happening by the way people change. The ones who once took pride in hurting you now walk differently, softer, slower, weighed down by the unshakable awareness that the world is no longer on their side. But this is also one of the most dangerous moments, because it's often when the very people who wronged you try to circle back into your life. They may return with softened tones, nostalgic memories, even words that sound like apologies. And here's the trap many fall for it. They believe the suffering they've witnessed is enough, that maybe it's time to forgive and forget. But the truth is simple. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. Re-entry into your life. That is a privilege they must earn, and most will never earn it. When you let someone back in too soon, when their motive is only to escape the consequences of their actions, you undo the work that both karma and your healing have already accomplished. It becomes a revolving door. They walk in, they walk out, and every time they take more from you. Why must you hold the line? Because patterns don't change overnight. People can lose money, face embarrassment, even endure public humiliation, and still cling to the same destructive behaviors. Pain doesn't automatically produce growth. Some people simply become better at hiding their patterns. If you let them back in without proof of transformation, you're giving them front row seats to repeat the same harm. And this is why your boundaries matter. Emotional boundaries are not just walls. They are a form of justice. They are the structure that keeps consequences in place. By keeping your distance, you allow the lessons they need to learn to unfold without interference. Step in too soon, and you risk protecting them from the very discomfort that could have pushed them toward true change. Another truth, many times, they return not seeking redemption, but seeking shelter. Toxic people often come back when every other source of supply has dried up. It's rarely about love, respect, or friendship. It's about convenience. You are the familiar ground they think they can stand on until the storm passes. And once the sky's clear, they often walk away, again leaving you with the wreckage and the illusion of closure. But closure doesn't come from them. Closure doesn't come from an apology. It comes from your decision to move forward without their validation. If they couldn't honor you before, their words now are unlikely to carry any weight. I once knew a man who had been betrayed by his business partner. That partner lost his credibility and his clients after the truth came to light a year later. Then came the message, kind words, an offer to reconcile, even a suggestion to start a new venture together. On the surface, it looked like healing, but the truth, his finances were in ruins, and he saw this man as a lifeline. By refusing to re-engage, the man didn't just protect his future, he protected his peace. So how do you protect yourself when they return? Listen for actions, not words. Anyone can speak sweetly when they're desperate. Real change is visible over time, not in a single conversation. Stay firm in your why. Remind yourself of the nights you cried, the trust they broke, the way they celebrated your pain. Those memories are not to hold grudges. They are there to protect you from repeating the cycle. When boundaries protect you from repeating the cycle, the next step is even more powerful. Redirect your focus. Every single moment you spend entertaining their return is a moment you could invest in building something new for yourself. New relationships, new goals, new peace. Why waste time revisiting the ruins when you could be laying the foundation for something better? Remember this, when karma is already at work, your only job is to step aside. The storm isn't yours to calm, and it isn't yours to control. Let the natural consequences finish their course. Keep your door locked from the inside. Victory doesn't always arrive with applause or celebration. Sometimes it comes quietly in the stillness of a sudden realization. That realization when you notice you no longer feel the sting of their name, the pull of their memory, or the heaviness of their actions. And in that moment, you finally understand you've already won. This victory isn't about revenge or power plays or public recognition. It's about reaching a place where their existence no longer disturbs your inner peace, where their downfall or even their apology becomes irrelevant to your joy. First, you are no longer triggered. There was a time when just hearing their name would ignite a flood of emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal. But now, it's just a name. No more late-night replays of old conversations. No more imaginary arguments in the shower. You've reclaimed your mental space, and that's a power they can never touch. Second, you've moved further than they ever expected. One of the sweetest forms of silent victory is living a life so far removed from the chaos they left behind. Maybe you've grown in your career, deepened your relationships, or developed a spiritual discipline that keeps you grounded. Whatever it is, you've built a reality they cannot reach, not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually. I once heard a story about a woman whose ex tried to ruin her financially and emotionally. Years later, they crossed paths at a social gathering. She was radiant, laughing with friends, living a life full of abundance. He, on the other hand, looked drained, his smile forced and heavy. She didn't need to say a single word. Her joy was the loudest statement in the room. Third, they start imitating you. And this may be one of the most ironic signs that you've won. They begin to copy the very things they once mocked you for: your way of speaking, your lifestyle, choices, even your boundaries. They may never admit it out loud, but deep down they've realized something. Your way of living works, theirs doesn't. And now they're chasing what they once ridiculed. Fourth, you've reached clarity. True victory is when you can think of them without bitterness, not because you excuse what they did, but because you've transcended it. You no longer see them as villains in your story. Instead, you see them as a chapter 1 that led to your growth, and that shift doesn't just set you free, it closes the door on any power they once had over you. Fifth, you've outgrown the need for revenge. This is where emotional intelligence reaches its highest form. You finally realize that revenge, even poetic justice, is a small prize compared to the life you've built. The greatest payback is peace, the kind no one can give you and no one can take away. Sixth, your silence now speaks louder than any argument ever could. In the early days, you may have been tempted to prove them wrong, to expose their lies, to confront them, but now your silence is enough. It says, you are no longer worth my words, my energy, or my time. And that silence, it echoes louder in their mind than anything you could have shouted. Why does this victory feel different? Because it's not about them anymore. It's about you. You've shifted your focus from the wound to the healing, from the betrayal to the breakthrough. And in that shift, you've found the kind of freedom they can never touch. When your silence and growth became the ultimate form of victory, there's an even rarer, more powerful point you eventually reach. It comes after a long season of betrayal, injustice, and silence. It's that moment when you wake up one morning and realize you no longer care about winning. And that's when you've truly won. At the beginning, every fiber of your being cried out for justice. You wanted them to feel what you had felt, the sleepless nights of doubt, the sharp sting of humiliation, the ache of being underestimated. You believed that seeing them fall would somehow heal the wound. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. You stopped tracking their every move. You stopped wondering if they regretted it. You stopped waiting for the day karma would finally knock on their door. Instead, you poured your energy into rebuilding yourself, into cultivating emotional intelligence that made you unshakable, into setting psychological boundaries that became the armor protecting your soul, into building a high-performance mindset that carried you forward no matter what. And it was in that very space that karma began to move, doing its work without you ever lifting a finger. This is the paradox of true power. When you stop craving revenge, you step into a power they can never steal. Because now, even if karma never visibly touches them, you've already won. Your life is the proof. The storms they sent your way became the winds that carried you higher. The betrayals they thought would bury you became the very soil where your roots grew deeper. You are no longer fighting on the same battlefield. They're still caught up in petty games, chasing short-term wins, drowning in the same chaos. Meanwhile, you're operating on an entirely different plane, one defined by purpose, clarity, and peace. That's why they can't reach you anymore. No matter what they try, you've outgrown the arena where they fight, and the world sees the difference. This is the part they never prepared for, that others would notice, that their smear campaigns would crumble against the steady consistency of your growth, that every rumor they spread would be drowned out by the undeniable reality of your life. Now you don't even need to defend yourself. Your results speak louder than any explanation. Here's the final irony. They once believed you needed them to succeed, but now they're the ones needing your approval, your presence, your forgiveness. And even if you choose not to give it, that is your right, because your decisions no longer come from bitterness, but from wisdom. And that kind of wisdom is the victory that lasts. It's not the fleeting rush of watching them suffer. It's the lifelong security of knowing they can never break you again. You walk through the fire, and instead of smelling like smoke, you shine like gold. And now, whenever you hear their name or see their face, it isn't pain you feel, it's gratitude. Not gratitude for what they did, but for what it taught you, that your worth is not defined by how others treat you, but by how you rise afterward. They thought they could break you. They thought you'd stay down. What they never understood is that every wound was sharpening you. Every setback was preparing you. Every betrayal was pushing you toward a version of yourself they could never handle. And now karma is doing what it does best, delivering lessons in silence. Justice without noise, consequences without warning. You don't have to lift a finger. You don't have to fight for revenge. The universe already has the scoreboard and you're ahead. Remember this, your peace is the loudest victory. Your growth is the ultimate revenge. So walk forward with emotional intelligence. Guard your psychological boundaries. Keep building a life so powerful that even your absence is felt. And if this message speaks to you, let me know in the comments. I know some of you are living proof of everything I've just said. And if you're ready to keep rising, keep winning, and keep mastering your mindset, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss another dose of unshakable wisdom. The war is over. You've already won.